Sometimes in debates with Christian apologists over the issue of whether or not Jesus existed as a historical character, they will claim that it's only in recent centuries that anyone has had any doubts about that whatsoever. That prior to this time, it didn't matter whether you were a Christian or a Muslim or Jew or a pagan or non-believer, everyone accepted that Jesus was in fact a flesh and blood human being who did walk the earth at one time. That the only controversy, the argument goes, is whether or not he was a liar or Lord or lunatic or a prophet or son of God or whatever it was. Well, in fact, as we read our Bible, we find that no, there wasn't always this certainty. Not only were there pagans who might have doubted whether or not Jesus existed, and their writings are hard to come by. The writings of some of the early pagan critics of Christianity, such as Thales, only come to us as they're quoted from Christian apologists. But if you read the Bible, you do find in the Epistles of John echoes of some of the early struggles among Christians themselves, among Christians who did not believe that Jesus was a flesh and blood character. Now, one of these two verses that I'm about to share with you, I have read before in earlier podcasts, but I think this is so important it deserves to have a podcast of its own, because this is the smoking gun of the Jesus myth. These two different chapters, these two epistles of John. Would everyone please turn to 1 John chapter 4, verse 1 to 3. Beloved, believe not every spirit, but try the spirits whether they are of God, because many false prophets are gone out into the world. Hereby know ye the Spirit of God. Every spirit that confesses that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh is of God. And every spirit that confesseth not that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh is not of God. And this is that spirit of Antichrist, whereof ye have heard that it should come, and even now is already in the world. And there's another epistle of John, the second epistle, verse 7. For many deceivers are entered into the world, who confess not that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh. This is a deceiver and an antichrist. So this is very interesting here. Not one, but two epistles which touch upon the subject of Christians who do not believe that Jesus was a flesh and blood character. And the fact that there were two different epistles on the subject indicates it must have been a problem for the early church. Now, John is talking about these spiritual beings who are confessing not that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh, and that you should test these spirits and so forth. Well, what he's talking about are demons, spirits that are not of God. And from someone who's looking at the world from a fundamentalist Christian perspective, whether we're talking about today or apparently whether we're talking about people who had written the New Testament, that they really do see that there are these invisible agents that are running about in the world trying to plant the seeds of doubt in the minds of faithful Christians. That this is the effort of Satan to try to lure Christians away from the love of Jesus and away from the message of salvation. Well, for those of us who look at the world from a naturalistic point of view, it's pretty obvious what the psychology is. These demons are imaginary, and they represent the anxieties that Christians feel. And apparently, whoever wrote these epistles of John had a great deal of anxiety about these demons that were planting doubts in the seeds of Christians, in the minds of Christians, that Jesus did exist, or were convincing Christians that Jesus did not exist. What's also interesting is he refers to deceivers and false prophets. Now, false prophets would indicate that these were people who were Christians who were teaching a false message about Christianity. He does not call them heathens. He does not call them outsiders who ridicule Christianity, claiming that Jesus never existed. He says that false prophets are teaching that Jesus had not come in the flesh. And so what this tells me is that there was, in fact, a sect of Christians who did not see Jesus as being a flesh and blood character. Now, this is especially interesting since we're supposed to believe that these were written by one of the very disciples of Christ. So consequently, it must have been written within a generation of those who would have remembered Jesus' ministry, his miracles, and everything that he did, and all the controversy he caused. I mean, surely there were family members of Jesus who might remember, yeah, I remember my uncle Yeshua, he was kind of crazy, claimed to be the Son of God or whatever. They might not have believed in his message, but at the very least they could have testified that he was in fact a flesh and blood character. So if the Orthodox Christians are correct, and these other Christians were really just a bunch of crazy schismatics. It would be very interesting because it would mean that an entire sect of devotees of Christ were convinced that he didn't exist, that they ignored an obvious historical reality and instead made up these fantasies that he was only a spiritual character. Now, I can't think of one time in history where a real person was later thought of as someone who didn't exist, who was later thought of as someone who was just existed only in parables or existed in a higher spiritual realm. It seems to always work the other way around, that a parable or a work of fiction is later thought of as a true story, or in some cases that a person who didn't actually exist is thought of as being a real person later on. That's often the progression that urban legends make as they go from fiction to claims that this really happened. So, from my perspective, it seems obvious that we should err on the side of maybe these early Christians who did not believe that Jesus had come in the flesh were in fact correct, that Jesus started off as a vision seen by Paul and later on was brought down to earth in parables, and later on these parables were thought to be true stories. Regardless, the smoking gun in the Bible proves that the Christian claims that nobody had any doubts that Jesus had come in the flesh prior to the last couple centuries is in fact not correct. I wish everyone a happy solstice. Sorry, one more thing I forgot to mention. And that is that the whole language of faith that these epistles use with regards to the historical Jesus, believe and confess that Jesus had come in the flesh. If Jesus had been an actual historical character, why would the Orthodox Christians have regarded it as an article of faith and used the language of faith, as opposed to appealing to history? Another curiosity about these epistles. Again, thank you for listening, and I hope everyone has a happy Sunday.